Hey, Burnett, so good to be back with you for another week. Two quick announcements we want to let you know about just before we get into service. The first announcement is that this Sunday, June 26th, we have team night. It's going to be a smaller gathering of people that are on team and serving with us. So if you are on team, or even if you want to become on team, come on out. It's going to be at 6 p.m. We'd invite you. It's going to be a little bit of a smaller crowd. So I know if you're COVID conscious, there's going to be lots of room for social distancing space, but we'd love for you to come and join us. It's going to be 6 to 7:30. There's going to be childcare, and then we have a special treat for you after. So come, hang out, be with us. We would love to absolutely see you and have you come out with us. And then finally, on July 13th, we're so excited to announce we're going to have a family movie night right here at the church. More details are going to come, but we're going to be watching Despicable Me. So we want you guys to come, hang out with us, hang out with the Minions, hang out with Gru. It's going to be a fantastic night, but we hope you have a fantastic week. But let's get ready for service.
Well, happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. It's a good day, right? Kind of feels like an April day. Like I walked out and I was like, ooh, what is this? Last time I got up and preached, I raved about springtime in BC, and it kind of just stayed. So maybe I'll rave about some summer. Maybe we can get some summer weather coming here. So yes, but happy Father's Day to all of our men out there. So the year was 2020. You remember that year, right? Right? It's kind of burned into our memories, or maybe we want to forget about it. It seems like maybe it was yesterday, even though it was 2 years ago, but it kind of seems like a lifetime ago all at once as well. Think back to being deep into lockdown life. Working from home full-time, educating our children full-time from home, cooking our meals full-time from home, doing all the things full-time, all the time from home. Emotions were strange, right? We were recovering from all of our plans being canceled, right? And we're unable to socialize. We're trying to balance out fear and faith and being together all the time at home. I clearly remember December 31st, 2019. Do you remember those New Year's resolutions you had? We're all like, yes, a new decade, 2020, best year ever, right? Ooh. Right? Remember how concerned we were about the wildfires in Australia in January? Maybe not unless you lived there, because 2020 of March comes rolling in like an atmospheric river and says, watch this. Right? And life around the globe gets flipped upside down. With lockdown life into full swing, the streets were empty. Gas was below $1. It's amazing. We had nowhere to go, right? Everyone and their grandmas were learning how to use Zoom to do everything from doctor's appointments to church to education. And many people, we turned to the arts and to creative endeavors, maybe to pass the time a little bit, but I think also to try to process what was happening, right? People who have never baked a thing before in their life are suddenly have their own sourdough bread companies, right? And they're learning how to paint, and people are using their musical talents to play from balconies and front porches to encourage their neighbors. We laughed and cried our way through movies and TV series. We finished Netflix. We tried to make sense of this new world, this new normal that we found ourselves in. And for many of us, the left side of our brains were having a little bit of issues trying to process everything that was going on logically. And so our right sides kicked in to help us navigate our way through the emotions. In summer of 2020, I was looking for direction. And so I turned to the book of Psalms. And I took 90 days to read through all 100 and study all 150 of the Psalms. I tell you, it was powerful to take 3 months to sit and ponder over the Psalms. It helped me to process all of the emotions and challenges and fears and joys and sorrows and disappointments and beauty and death. Right, I found my experiences were not in isolation. Right, I was experiencing what so much of the world was experiencing. And I saw these same questions and experiences that were penned in these 150 Psalms so long ago. As David and the other authors of the Psalms wrote poetry and songs out of their experience and knowledge of who God was, I found myself relating to their words. So over the next 90 days as a church, we're going to make our way through a series called Summer in the Psalms. So I'd encourage you to join us. I'm going to do a brief intro, well, sort of brief. I'm going to do an intro this week to the Psalms. Next week, Pastor Tim is going to wrap up our series from Sermon on the Mount. And then we're going to spend July and August exploring the Psalms together. We created this handy little study guide for you. So these are available after the service if you've ordered them. If not, we have more printed, and you can certainly pick one up there. This guide is going to take you through 1 to 4 Psalms, kind of depending on the length of them each day. We'll have some social media. There's some questions for you to kind of consider throughout your day, a space to journal if you're into that as well. Or maybe once a week you want to get together with a friend and kind of talk about some of the things that you have been learning. There's lots of different options of how to go through that. But today, my goal is to get you excited about the Psalms. And for me, I get excited about the Bible when I can really understand how a piece of Scripture fits into the bigger story that the Bible and God are telling. So I want to give you a framework for the Psalms today. It's going to be kind of like a good old-fashioned Bible study today that will help you see how the Psalms fit into the larger story and how our personal stories are also a reflection of the Psalms and of what God is doing. Now, here's just some facts. So the Psalms, the majority of the Psalms were written and used for temple worship for the Israelites. David wrote 75 of them. 48 of them were anonymous. Moses wrote one of them, and the rest were written by a variety of different authors. They were collected over a 1,000-year period, and over these 150 chapters, the praise and prayers of ancient Israel are reflected. These were common songs, maybe songs that, they would just sing around their house on a regular basis. And these psalms became the heartbeat of the early church as well. And as we move throughout history, we actually see how they influenced and impacted our worship and theology. Martin Luther, he had a really Christ-centered interpretation of the Psalms, and they were like key parts of the doctrine of the Reformation. And today, I'm sure as you know, lots of the songs that we sing and relate to are heavily influenced by the Psalms. They're a part of our key understanding of the story of God and the story that we find ourselves in. So, if the Psalms were initial prayers and reflections of the Hebrew people, I thought it would be good for us to see a historical timeline of the Israelites and remember parts of their history. So I made this timeline. I'm super excited. Any history geeks? Right? Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Ernie. So I get caught every once in a while in my house, like watching documentaries and whatnot, because I love history. Okay, so this is not to scale. All right, just put that out there. It doesn't have all of the events. These are your big events and some of the central people, okay? So if this is not your thing, just try to stay with me. It won't be very long, okay? So we start, okay, new screen, right? Pretty good. You can read the words. So I was like, I'm putting something up here that we can use today. I was so excited about it. So we start way back here at creation to about 2000 BC. Your major events that happen here are creation, fall, floods, God's promises, his covenant to Abraham. We then jump up to 1500 BC. We have Moses, Israel's early days, slavery, wilderness wandering. This is when they are in Egypt, and then the exodus out of Egypt. And then a whole lot of wandering that happened after that. From 1400 BC to about 1095 BC, the Israelites have entered into the promised land, and they're experiencing kingdom life for the first time. They have God as their king, and the judges are there to help guide them along. But then they start to complain. No one knows anything about that, right? They start to complain. They want to be like all the other nations around them. It's like the ultimate keeping up with the Joneses. So they say, we want a king. And so this period here, the judges, lasts for about 400 years. Them being together as a unified nation only lasts, under the kings, only lasts about 165 years. We have King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. And then in 970, the nation is split into two kingdoms. We have the northern kingdom, which retains the name of Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is now called Judah. Then, in 570, actually it was about 200 years after the kingdom split, Assyria takes over the northern kingdom, and then Babylon, about 140 years after that, the Babylonians come over and take over the southern kingdom. By 570, everyone is in complete exile. 500 BC, Israel is able to return to their land, but they're under foreign leadership at this time. Then we kind of have this space in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So this is really, obviously, really heavily focused on the Old Testament here, guys. But we have this space. During this time, Israel remains under foreign leadership for most of this time in between the Old and New Testament, except for this little bit of period called the Maccabean Revolt. In 63 BC, the Romans take over. Jesus is born, they think, in about 4 BC, 4 to 6 BC, and then the New Testament catches up with us, and we have the death and resurrection of Jesus, and then we have the apostles and the early church. So, it's kind of interesting, right? I thought it was interesting. What I found interesting was kind of how all of the books of the Bible fit in, because you can see it's not in chronological order in your Bible, right? We have Psalm 90 that's written way over here, and the Psalms, again, are written over this 1,000-year period. So I geeked out on it. I thought it was kind of interesting. And why is it important? Why is it important for us to understand? Because as you read the Bible, or really any part of the Bible, understanding the context and the overarching story that the scriptures are telling are going to lead you to a deeper understanding of the scriptures. Because context is everything. And what can happen if we just try to take some shortcuts and just look for some Cole's Note versions of the Bible, we can run into some trouble. Because some people might just look at the Bible through the lens of it's a book of laws, right? Or some people might look at the Bible through the lens of it's just like a blessing and promises handbook, right? But if the Bible is just a massive book of laws, we become legalists, right? We become self-righteous. We become finger-pointing and arrogant. If the Bible is just a book of sayings to grab as a blessing before you walk out the door, our faith can become shallow. And when hard times hit and we don't have a depth and understanding and the breadth of the story that we find ourselves in, a shallow faith might not carry us through. For example, you could pull out a verse like Psalm 46:10 that says, "Be still and know that I am God." I love this verse. It's wisdom. Be still and know that I am God. It's a beautiful truth. It's a verse to hold on to. But this is the imagery that we normally see. If you were to Google, "Be still and know that I am God," and then hit the image category, this is what you'll see. Someone sitting on a dock or in a field, breathtaking sunset, peace all around them, which isn't a bad thing. Gosh, I would love, these moments are beautiful, aren't they? When you get this moment of peace, who couldn't find peace there in connection with God? But when the author of Psalm 46 wrote this psalm, they were most likely in the middle of a battle. And the author was reminding the children of Israel that in the middle of the battle and the chaos, to remember who God is. Remember that He is your refuge and your strength and your victory. You know when the power of Psalm 46:10 hits home for me? It's when I remember what it was like when I had 3 kids under the age of 4 at home. And the laundry didn't stop. Two of them were twins, so the laundry didn't stop. It still doesn't stop. Does anyone figure that out? But the laundry didn't stop. There was possibly one or all 3 of them needing me immediately. Sleepless nights, a body that was not my own. And I needed this verse in the context of the battle. I needed to remember who God was and that I had victory in the middle of my battle. and that he was meeting me in the middle of my chaos. Right? That verse has so much more power when I put it into the context of the bigger story. And the Psalms are interesting as well, because each of the Psalms can stand on their own. It's kind of like a musical. This past April, quite a few of our youth were in Newsies. It was amazing to see they did a good job. The Christian school put it on, and they really did a fantastic job. Now, in Newsies or in any other musical, many of the songs can stand on their own, right? It's why they get stuck in your head and you're singing them through the night or something, right? They get stuck in your head. They can stand on their own. But when you put them in the context of a play and you see them from beginning to end, they tell this story. And this is what the Psalms does as well. This one book gives us a run-through over this period, gives us a run-through from Genesis to Malachi, and then it pushes the story forward to Jesus. Tomorrow, our reading plan is going to start in Psalm 1. It's a good place to start. It's an introductory to the Psalms. If you had your Bibles this morning, you could open up to Psalms 1 and 2, and what you would see there is this introductory to the Psalms. Psalm 1, we have a man who loves God and lives by his word. And then in Psalms chapter 2, verse 2, the author uses this term, anointed one. And the word anointed is the same word for Messiah. Then in verse 7, it says, "You are my son, and today I have become your father." All of Psalm 2 is pointing towards Jesus. Jesus as Messiah and Jesus as King, which is then referenced and confirmed throughout the New Testament. The Psalms is actually the most quoted book in the New Testament from the Old Testament. And in relation to Psalms 1 and 2, James Johnson, he's a theologian, he says, in a real sense, the rest of this book, from chapter 3 on, is about this king, his kingdom, and his people. So, as we dive into the Psalms this summer, here are some key things I'd like you guys to keep in mind as we go. So the Psalms were divided into 5 books. So I don't know, you might want to take a picture of this. It might be in the way. But this is just some good information for you guys to have. I'm going to go through it quickly here. But so the Psalms were divided into 5 books. Book 1 is chapters 1 to 41. The majority of these Psalms were written by David during his time as king and focused on his experience. One of the themes that you could pull out is that God rescues his king from his enemies. Then we go to book 2, which is chapters 42 to 72. There's a larger variety of authors here. David still does write most of them. And the question, and it's really talking about, the focus here is more on the people and the kingdom. And the theme, one theme that you could pull out here is that God rescues his people from their enemies through their king. Then book 3 really takes a turn. It's chapter 73 to 89, and it takes a turn here, and it asks some really tough questions. Most of these Psalms were written later and compiled most likely when Israel was in captivity in Babylon. And these Psalms ask questions like, how long will this last, God? Is there any hope? Why did you allow this to happen? Don't you remember us? Like tough things. These are Psalms of lament. And a theme here that you could pull out would be, how could God abandon his king and his people? In book 4 is chapters 90 to 106. These chapters remind us and reaffirm that God is still king. And the Israelites, they begin to view their captivity in a different light. And a theme here that you could pull out is that God is still king over all the world. Book 5 is compiled after exile. So they had been exiled for disobeying. And now that they're back in the land, they're asking questions about, like, how should I live my life now that I'm back in the land? These chapters speak to a king that is greater than David. And over again, if you read those chapters with a Christ-centered lens, you are going to see how Jesus is throughout all of these chapters. And a theme here could be that God is still king and his promise is still alive. All right, those are all the facts, okay? I know it's a lot of information today. But these are some of the themes throughout the Psalms. And what I appreciate about the Psalms is that I can see my story fitting into so many of these themes in my life. Is there ever a time you go to pray and you just don't have the words? It happens to me on a regular basis. I sit down and I don't know God. And often my prayer journal is filled with the Psalms, because somehow in their beauty and in their poetry, the authors there, they find ways and words to write that really represent what I'm feeling and what I can't put words to. And going over Israel's timeline this week was such an inspiration for me because it made me think about my own timeline. I can look back over and see God's faithfulness throughout Israel's story. And we get the privilege of seeing the whole story played out throughout the Bible. I read this quote this morning as I was getting ready, and it says one of the overarching themes of the Bible is that God does not give up on them. That's pretty cool. God does not give up on them, because we get the privilege of seeing how God kept his promises to Abraham and Isaac. We can see what the Israelites couldn't see as they were wandering in the desert. We can see what happens when they demand a king, when they're disobedient and their land is taken from them, and they go into exile. Right? The author of the Psalms are in the middle of exile and destruction, and they cannot see how God is going to keep his promises. In Psalm 89, verses 38 and 39, it says, "But you have spurned and rejected him. You have become enraged with your anointed one. You have repudiated the covenant with your servant. You have completely dishonored his crown." Ethan, who wrote Psalm 89, is saying that God has gone back on his word. Right? The authors have some hard questions and statements in the middle of their trials. And we get the privilege of seeing how it all plays out. We can see the excitement that they have when they're able to return to their land, but they're still in need of their own king. And we get to see how God's plan is carried forth throughout the Old Testament, and then we arrive to Jesus. And he is the fulfillment. He is the king. He's the Messiah that the Israelites had been waiting for. So again, looking at this timeline and pondering the Psalms this week had me really thinking about my own timeline and maybe things that I can't see or that I need to remember. Because again and again, the Psalms are calling us back to remember what God has done. Psalm 143, verse 5 says, "I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you've done. I reflect on the work of your hands." Psalm 77:11 says, "I will remember the Lord's work. Yes, I remember your ancient wonders." So I've been taking time to reflect on God's faithfulness in my whole life, over my whole timeline. Taking time to remember the greatness and goodness of God in my days. Because I've been in seasons where I can celebrate how God has rescued me, seasons of those mountaintop experiences, seeing how God came through, what it felt like the very last minute. I've had those themes in my life that the book of Psalms have, right? Seasons of questioning and doubt, seasons of wondering if God was going to be faithful, if he was going to come through on his promises. I've had seasons of asking, God, how long will this last? How did we get here? And God, are you trustworthy? So I did my own timeline. Here's my brief history. Like all of us, my timeline starts prior to my birth, which was 1980. Significant things obviously happened before my birth, right, in the life of my family. And then after I was born in 1985, we moved to Calgary from Kamloops, so I am a BC girl originally. And then my growing up years, kind of from 85 to 98, I kind of smushed them all together. There was definitely noteworthy things there, but just for time today, I just didn't have enough time. In 98, I graduated high school. I went to YWAM, which messed my life up for Jesus in all the right ways. In 2001, it was a very significant year for me. I returned home from YWAM. I went to university. I met Tim. And then early in 2002, my sister passed away, my older sister. In 2005, we had our first ministry job, and we moved our family, me and Tim. We moved to London, Ontario. In 2008, we became first-time parents, and we started our church planting journey. In 2010, another really significant year, probably the hardest year of my life. During that year, we were displaced from the U.S. We were theoretically without a home for a season, and we also experienced the death of our son, Isaac. It was a hard year. All of three of those major events happened in the first 5 weeks of the year. In 2012, we had the birth of Julian and Mackenzie. We were still church planting at the time. In 2015, we left our church plant, and to be honest with you guys, it was the hardest year of our marriage. In 2017, I stepped into my first pastoral role, which obviously was notable for me. And then in 2021, we moved to Maple Ridge, and we began pastoring here at Burnett, which was a very momentous moment for our family, and we're so glad that we're here. Yeah. So this is my brief timeline of my history and some of the significant things that have happened in my life. And what I can see God's faithfulness again and again and again. I can see some of the same themes of the Psalms that we see, right? I can see myself asking God in certain seasons, like, how could you let this happen? I can see myself living in seasons of a sort of exile because there was sin in my life that I had to deal with. I can see God transforming, the transformational of work in Jesus in my life. I can see myself stepping into the calling that God had for me. I can see how God rescues me again and again. Guys, when we had to leave the U.S., we were doing an internship down there, and our paperwork didn't come through, and our home in London was rented out, and we had a little family of 3. We had nowhere to go. I was pregnant with our son. It's January. We're in a hotel, and our U-Haul truck is in the driveway with all of our belongings. Yeah, I had some questions for God. Right? I was wondering if God was going to show up. But I can look back now and see how he moved in that situation. In 2015, the hardest year of our marriage, I can look back and see God's absolute faithfulness. And I'm so thankful for that year now because God moved in our marriage in incredible ways. And God didn't give up on us, and neither did we. As I grieved over the death of my son, and I questioned God about his promises, and I poured out my heart in grief and in anger, I had questions for him. But I can look back, guys, and I can see the beauty of God working in my life every day. He did not leave me alone. And the older I get, the more markers I can put in my life, those flags I get to plant, saying, you were faithful then, you will be faithful now. At the very end, I added these little bubbles at the bottom, and these represent the chapters that are not yet written in my life. And in these chapters that are not yet written, my goal is to remember what God has already done and how he was faithful through all my days, because there's going to be hard years. There will be. It's a facts of life. And there's going to be these amazing experiences. And what I know is that God is going to be faithful in all of my chapters. Psalms is a call to remember. So what about your timeline? What theme are you in right now? Maybe it's a hard year, hard few years, decade. They happen. Maybe you are asking those tough questions. Ask them, right? They did in the Psalms, so ask the hard questions. Is there some sin in your life that you need to deal with? Some things that you need to cut off and repent? Right? Come as you are, and then let Jesus do the transformational work in your life. Maybe you're just on the other side of a hard season, And God has answered those questions. And now you're kind of saying, okay, God, what now? How do you want me to live? What else do you want me to transform in my life? We are always in a transformational process, either to God or away from God. Maybe you can see how God has faithfully brought you through, like the Israelites, sort of a season of exile. And you found your way back to God, and there is now a maturity that God is asking you to step into. Maybe it's a time to ask, what story is my life telling, right? Is it a story of self-centeredness? Or is it a story of hope, even in the middle of a difficult season? What's beautiful is that we can look back over the timeline of the Israelites and see how their whole story is pointing towards Jesus, right? It's not a smooth or a straight line. We put it on a straight line, but it's not a straight line, right? It's up and down and all around, but it is a journey, and it's a story of redemption and forgiveness and hope, and Jesus becoming their king. In your life and in your heart, is it pointed towards Jesus? Are you making decisions regularly to draw close to God, even in the middle of the hard stuff? Maybe you need to take time to reflect on God's faithfulness in your past. Maybe you need to pause and consider God's faithfulness today and in this moment. Maybe you need to remind yourself of the trustworthiness of God, and that God is a God who keeps his promises. He is faithful, he is loving, he is kind. Maybe today you need to pause and praise Jesus for who he is and what he's done, because King Jesus is worthy. Maybe we need to turn our hearts towards thanksgiving. Psalm 8, verses 4 and 5 say, "What are mere mortals, that you should think about them? Human beings, that you should care for them. Yet," that is a good word in the Bible, "yet you made them only a little lower than God, and you crowned them with glory and honor." Guys, God cares about you, and he cares about your timeline. He cares about the chapters that you are writing in your life. There is a purpose. There is a calling. There is a direction. You are not here by accident. There is a God that loves you. Jesus loves you so much that yet, while we were sinners, Christ died for us. Family, you are loved. Jesus is the one. He is the answer that we have been looking for. He is the king that the Israelites were looking for throughout their whole entire time. And today, he is still the one. So no matter where you find yourself this morning, I hope this closing song, this modern day psalm, might be your heart's cry. And it says, "I will praise on the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain is in my way. You are the summit where my feet are, so I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray, because you are heaven where my heart is, in the highlands, in the heartaches, all the same." Church family, let's worship together.
Well, what a great sermon that was, just as we kick off our summer in the Psalms. Church, we hope you had such a fantastic time spending with us, enjoying that message, and we hope you're doing well. If you need anything at all, send us an email, info@burnettchurch.com. But God bless, and we'll see you soon.